My MIL announced my miscarriage at dinner, and I announced her affair at her anniversary party. I was 12 weeks pregnant when I felt something warm running down my leg during work. I went to the bathroom and saw blood soaking through my dress. I called my husband Mac with shaking hands and said, "Something's wrong with the baby. There's so much blood. Come get me now." He said, "I'm on my way, don't move," and I could hear him grabbing his keys and running. By the time they got me into a room and hooked up to the monitors, our baby was already gone. The doctor used words like spontaneous and nothing you could have done, but all I heard was that the tiny heartbeat we'd seen on the ultrasound 3 weeks ago had stopped, and there was no medical reason why. Mac sat on the edge of my hospital bed and put his face in his hands and cried, and I reached for him and said, "I'm so sorry," and he looked up and said, "Don't, this isn't your fault," and pulled me into his chest, and we stayed like that until the nurse came to tell us about next steps. We agreed to tell no one until we were ready. "I can't handle your mother right now," I said, and Mac nodded and said, "I know, we'll tell people when you're ready. No one needs to know yet." I trusted him because I had no reason not to, and I forgot that keeping secrets from his mother Lorena was impossible because she had a key to our house and used it whenever she felt like it. 3 days later, I was sitting on the kitchen floor crying into a onesie I'd bought the week before when I heard the front door open, and there was Lorena standing over me with grocery bags in her hands and her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Well," she said, looking around at the tissues scattered across the floor and the empty ice cream container on the counter, "This is quite a scene." I wiped my face and said, "Lorena, I wasn't expecting you," and she stepped over me to set her bags on the counter and said, "Clearly. You know, when Mac told me you weren't feeling well, I assumed it was something minor. A cold, maybe. Not a complete breakdown in the middle of the day." She turned and looked at the onesie in my hands, and her eyes narrowed. "Is that baby clothes? Why are you sitting on the floor crying over baby clothes, Elise?" I didn't want to tell her anything, but she kept staring at me with that look she gave servers when her food came out wrong, and the words came out anyway because I was exhausted and empty, and I just wanted her to leave. "I lost the baby," I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. 3 days ago. We weren't going to tell anyone yet. Lorena's face changed into something that almost looked like sympathy if you didn't know her well enough to see the calculation behind it. She lowered herself to the floor beside me and grabbed my hands and said, "Oh, honey, that explains everything. I knew something was off with you lately, but I thought you were just being moody again." I said, "I'm not being moody. I lost my baby," and she squeezed my hands and said, I know, and I'm sure you're blaming yourself even though the doctor probably told you these things just happen sometimes, especially with first pregnancies, especially when the mother is under a lot of stress." She looked at me with her head tilted. "You have been under a lot of stress, haven't you? Working all those hours, not taking care of yourself properly. I told Mac months ago that you needed to slow down, but you never listened to me." I pulled my hands away and said, "The doctor said it wasn't anything I did," and Lorena nodded slowly and said, "Of course he did. They always say that, but we both know you could have taken better care of yourself, eaten better, rested more. You're not exactly known for putting your family first, are you?" She patted my knee. "But what's done is done. No point dwelling on it now." I said, "Please don't tell anyone. I need time before the whole family knows." And she put her hand over her heart and said, "Sweetheart, I would never betray your trust like that. I swear on my marriage this stays between us until you're ready, though I do think the family deserves to know eventually. They've been asking about grandchildren for years, and it's not fair to keep them in the dark forever just because you're embarrassed." That Friday she called and said she was organizing a small dinner because we needed to be surrounded by people who loved us. "Just immediate family," she said. "You really do need to get out of that house. Sitting around crying isn't going to bring the baby back." I said, "I don't think I'm ready for company," and she sighed heavily and said, "Elise, this isn't about what you want. Mac is struggling and he needs his family around him right now. Or is this going to be like every other time when your needs come before his?" So I put on a dress and let Mac drive me to his parents' house where 30 people were waiting in the dining room. I grabbed his arm and whispered, "You said immediate family," and he said, "I guess Mom invited more people. Just get through it." Lorena floated through the crowd in a cream dress, and when she saw me, she rushed over and grabbed my face and said loudly, "Oh, you poor thing. You look exhausted. Have you been sleeping at all? You have bags under your eyes." Everyone nearby turned to look at me. Halfway through dinner, Lorena stood up and tapped her wine glass, and the room went silent. "I need your prayers," she said with tears rolling down her cheeks. "My son just lost his first baby, and I'm trying to be strong for him, but my heart is absolutely shattered." 30 faces turned to me. Lorena sat back down and grabbed my hand and leaned close and whispered, "You should really smile. People are going to think you don't appreciate them being here for you." I decided right then that tomorrow morning I was sitting Mac down and forcing him to choose between me and his mother. Lorena thought I would keep quiet because that's what I always did, but she just made the biggest mistake of her life. She wanted to play the grieving grandmother in front of 30 people, so I was going to make her explain why she broke her promise in front of her son. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't afraid of what would happen when I finally stopped being polite. I'll tell you exactly how that conversation went. The car ride home was silent for the first 10 minutes. I stared out the window and waited for Mac to say something, to apologize, to acknowledge that his mother had just done something unforgivable. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "I know tonight wasn't what you expected," and I laughed out loud because that was the biggest understatement I'd ever heard. "Wasn't what I expected?" Mac, your mother announced our miscarriage to 30 people after she promised she wouldn't tell anyone. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel and said, "She was trying to help. She thought you needed support." I turned to look at him and said, "She thought I needed support? Or she thought she needed an audience?" He didn't answer. We pulled into our driveway and he turned off the car and sat there staring at the garage door. "I need you to apologize to her," he said quietly. I was sure I'd misheard him. "Excuse me?" He turned to face me with that soft expression he wore when he was about to ask me to do something I didn't want to do. "You barely spoke to anyone all night. You didn't thank her for the dinner. You just sat there looking miserable, and now she's upset upset because she thinks you're mad at her. I opened my mouth and closed it because I could not find words for what I was hearing. I am mad at her, I finally said. She told everyone about the baby after she promised she wouldn't. I have a right to be mad, Mac. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. She made a mistake. She got emotional. But giving her the silent treatment all night was cruel, and you need to apologize by tomorrow morning. I got out of the car and walked inside without answering. He followed me into the bedroom and said, Elise, I'm serious. She called me crying on the way home. She thinks you hate her. I pulled on my pajamas and said, good, maybe she should think about why. He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. You're being unreasonable. All she did was ask for prayers. That's what family does. I climbed into bed and turned off my lamp and said, if you can't see what she did wrong, then I don't know how to explain it to you. He stood there in the dark for a long moment, then walked out, and I heard the guest room door close behind him. The next morning, I woke up to 17 text messages. Mac's aunt asking if I was okay because Lorena had called her worried about my mental state. His cousin asking if I needed anything because she heard I wasn't handling the loss well. His other cousin saying Lorena mentioned I'd been acting erratic, and did I want to talk to someone professional. I scrolled through message after message from people I barely knew expressing concern about my stability, because Lorena had spent the night calling everyone in the family to tell them something was wrong with me. I found Mac in the kitchen drinking coffee and showed him my phone. Look at this. Look what she's doing. He glanced at the screen and shrugged. She's just worried about you. We all are. I said, she's not worried about me. She's trying to make everyone think I'm crazy so that when I tell them what she did, they won't believe me. Mac set down his coffee and said, listen to yourself right now. You sound paranoid. My mother loves you. She's trying to help and you're acting like she's some kind of villain. I stared at him and realized he was never going to see it. He'd spent 30 years being trained to believe everything Lorena did was out of love, and nothing I said was going to undo that programming in one conversation. 3 days later, a coworker stopped me in the hallway and asked if everything was okay at home. I said, what do you mean? And she looked uncomfortable and said, your mother-in-law came to my church's prayer group last night. She asked everyone to pray for you because you're not taking care of yourself. She said you've been struggling since the pregnancy, and she's worried you might hurt yourself. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Lorena had gone to my coworker's church. She had stood up in front of strangers and painted me as someone who might hurt herself. She was building a case, documenting a pattern, making sure that when I finally snapped and told everyone what she'd done, they would already believe I was unstable. I drove home and found Mac watching TV and said, your mother told my coworker's prayer group that she's worried I might hurt myself. He muted the TV and said, she mentioned she was going to talk to some people about getting you support. I think it's a good idea, actually. You haven't been yourself lately. I said, I haven't been myself because I lost a baby, and then your mother announced it to 30 people, and then she spent the next week telling everyone I'm crazy. He stood up and walked over to me and put his hands on my shoulders like he was trying to calm a scared animal. Babe, I think you should talk to someone. A therapist, maybe. Mom knows a really good one from church. She thinks you're not processing the loss in a healthy way, and honestly, I'm starting to agree with her. I pulled away from him. You want me to see a therapist your mother recommended so she can control that narrative too? He threw his hands up. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're acting like everyone is out to get you. That's not normal, Elise. That's not healthy. That night, he moved into the guest room. He said he needed space to think because I was refusing to apologize and I was refusing to get help, and he didn't know what else to do. I lay in our bed alone, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how Lorena had managed to isolate me completely in less than 2 weeks. My husband thought I was crazy. His family thought I was crazy. My coworkers thought I was crazy. She had taken my worst moment and used it to destroy every relationship I had, and she'd done it all while crying and asking for prayers. The next morning, I saw that Lorena had posted a photo from the dinner on Facebook. It was a picture of her hugging me at the table with her eyes closed and her face pressed against my hair. The caption said, please pray for my sweet daughter-in-law during this difficult time. She's struggling, but our family will get her through it. 200 likes, 40 comments about what an amazing mother-in-law she was. A dozen people tagging mental health resources for me to read. I screenshotted everything and sent it to my best friend Danielle with the message, am I crazy or is this insane? She called me immediately. What the actual hell is wrong with this woman? She's posting about your miscarriage on Facebook and making it sound like you're having a breakdown? I told her everything. The dinner, the texts, the prayer group, Mac moving to the guest room. Danielle was quiet for a long time and then said, you need to get out of there. This woman is trying to destroy you and your husband is helping her do it. I said, I can't just leave. Where would I go? She said, you can stay with me. But Elise, I'm serious. What she's doing is not normal. This is calculated. She's setting you up for something and you need to figure out what it is before she finishes building her case. I thanked her and hung up and sat in my kitchen wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely in 2 weeks. I'd lost my baby, I'd lost my husband, I'd lost my reputation, and Lorena was out there collecting sympathy and prayers while I sat alone in a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. I agreed to help set up Lorena's anniversary party, but I wasn't going there to fold napkins. She thought sending me into her house alone was safe because she'd already convinced everyone I was the crazy one. But women like Lorena always have secrets, and I was going to search every room until I found something that proved who she really was. She had no idea what she was handing me when she gave me those keys. What I found in her closet changed absolutely everything. 2 weeks after the dinner, Lorena called and said she needed help setting up for her 30th anniversary party. Kenneth's out of town until Thursday, and I can't possibly do everything myself, she said in that sweet voice that made me want to throw my phone across the room. You'll come help, won't you? It would mean so much to me. I said yes because Mac was standing right there, and because I knew refusing would give her more ammunition. She'd tell everyone I was too unstable to help with a simple party. She'd add it to her list of evidence that something was wrong with me. So Saturday morning, I drove to her house and spent 3 hours carrying boxes and ironing tablecloths while she supervised from the couch and pointed out everything I was doing wrong. "The napkins need to be folded into swans, not rectangles," she said without looking up from her phone. "And those centerpieces need to go on the west side of the room. The light is better there for photos." I nodded and adjusted and rearranged and fantasized about walking out the door and never coming back. Around noon, she sent me upstairs to grab extra chairs from her bedroom closet. "They're in the back," she called after me. "Behind the boxes. Make sure you don't mess up anything while you're looking." I climbed the stairs and went into the master bedroom and opened the closet door. It was massive, a walk-in the size of my living room with shelves and drawers and racks of clothes organized by color. I pushed past the dresses and moved some boxes and found the chairs folded up against the back wall. As I was pulling them out, I knocked over a shoebox on the top shelf and it fell open and receipts scattered everywhere. I knelt down to gather them and that's when I saw what they were for. Jewelry, expensive jewelry, a diamond bracelet from 2 years ago, pearl earrings from last Christmas, a necklace that cost more than my car. I'd never seen Lorena wear any of these things, not once. I was putting the receipts back when I heard her phone buzz from the nightstand in the bedroom. She must have left it upstairs when she went to answer the door earlier. I should have ignored it. I should have grabbed the chairs and gone back downstairs and pretended I never saw anything. But something made me walk over and look at the screen. The notification was from someone named Emmanuel with a heart emoji. The preview showed the first line of the text. "Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you." My whole body went cold. Emmanuel. I knew that name. He was the deacon at Lorena's church. He'd been coming to family dinners for years. He always sat next to her, always refilled her wine glass before anyone else's, always laughed a little too hard at her jokes. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a different Emmanuel. Maybe the text was innocent and I was reading into it because I wanted to find something wrong with her. But my hands were already moving. I picked up her phone and typed in the passcode I'd watched her enter 100 times at family dinners. It opened immediately. I went to her messages and found Emmanuel's thread and started scrolling. "I miss you already. You're the only one who understands me. Kenneth doesn't touch me the way you do. I wish I'd married you instead." 7 years of messages. 7 years of "I love you" and "I need you" and "you're my soulmate" and explicit descriptions of things that made my stomach turn. I kept scrolling with shaking hands and found photos. Lorena in lingerie I'd never seen before. Emmanuel shirtless in what looked like a hotel room. The two of them together in bed with timestamps from dates I recognized. Their anniversary trip to Napa. The family reunion in Lake Tahoe. Christmas Eve 2 years ago when she said she was tired and went to bed early. I backed out of the messages and checked her photos and found a hidden album with hundreds more. Hotel rooms and restaurant receipts and screenshots of reservations at places she'd told Kenneth she was visiting with her girlfriends. Then I remembered the jewelry receipts. I went back to the closet and looked at the dates. Every piece was purchased within a week of one of their anniversary trips. Emmanuel had been buying her gifts that she couldn't wear around her husband. Gifts she kept hidden in her closet like trophies. I stood in that closet surrounded by evidence of 7 years of lies and felt something shift inside me. This woman had destroyed my reputation. She had turned my husband against me. She had announced my dead baby to 30 people and then told everyone I was crazy when I got upset about it. And the whole time she was preaching about faithfulness and family values while sleeping with the church deacon. I pulled out my phone and started screenshotting everything. The texts, the photos, the receipts. I worked quickly and methodically and saved every piece of evidence I could find to my own phone. Then I put her phone back exactly where I found it and grabbed the chairs and walked downstairs and said, "Found them. Where do you want me to set them up?" Lorena smiled at me from the couch and said, "By the windows. And thank you so much for helping. I know things have been hard between us lately, but I really do appreciate you." I smiled back and said, "Of course. That's what family is for." She had no idea that I had just found everything I needed to destroy her. I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up chairs and hanging decorations and watching Lorena bark orders at the caterers while I thought about what I was going to do with the information I'd found. Part of me wanted to tell Kenneth immediately. He deserved to know what his wife had been doing for 7 years, but another part of me knew that wasn't enough. Lorena had humiliated me publicly. She had stood up in front of 30 people and announced my miscarriage, and then spent 2 weeks making everyone think I was unstable. She didn't deserve a quiet conversation. She deserved to feel exactly what I had felt. Exposed, humiliated, destroyed in front of everyone she wanted to impress. The anniversary party was in 2 weeks. 200 guests were coming to celebrate 30 years of faithful marriage. There would be a projector for the slideshow and a microphone for the toasts. And every person Lorena had ever tried to impress would be in that room watching her accept congratulations for a marriage she'd been destroying since before I even met Mac. I drove home with my phone full of screenshots and a plan starting to form in my mind. I had 7 years of proof saved to my phone, and I was finally going to show Mac exactly who his perfect mother really was. Lorena had no idea I found her burner while she was downstairs bragging about her faithful marriage. Tonight, I was sitting my husband down and making him look at every text until he couldn't deny it anymore. There was no way he could defend her after seeing this. I'll tell you exactly how that conversation went. I waited until Mac came home from work and sat him down at the kitchen table and said, "I need to show you something, and I need you to actually look at it before you say anything." He sighed like I was about to waste his time, but he sat down and said, "Fine, what is it?" I slid my phone across the table with Emmanuel's messages open on the screen. "I found this on your mother's phone today. She's been having an affair with Deacon Emmanuel for 7 years." Mac picked up the phone and scrolled in silence for a long time. I watched his face, waiting to see the moment when he realized I'd been telling the truth about her all along. When he finally looked up, his expression wasn't shock or anger or betrayal. It was disgust, aimed at me. "You went through my mother's phone?" he said. I blinked. "Did you read what's on there? She's been cheating on your father for 7 years, Mac, with the church deacon. There are photos and receipts receipts, and he stood up and threw my phone on the table. I don't care what's on there. You broke into my mother's phone and invaded her privacy, and now you're trying to use whatever you found to turn me against her. I could feel the floor shifting beneath me. I didn't break into anything. She left her phone upstairs and I saw a text notification and I looked because you're obsessed with proving she's evil. He cut me off. You've been paranoid about her for weeks and now you're going through her phone looking for dirt. Do you hear how crazy that sounds? I grabbed the phone and held it up. Look at the pictures, Mac. Look at the dates. She was with him on your parents' anniversary trip. She was with him on Christmas Eve. This isn't paranoia. This is proof. He shook his head slowly. Or it's fake. You could have made all of this up. Photoshopped the texts. Created fake screenshots to frame her because you're jealous of how close we are. I stared at him and realized he was never going to believe me. It didn't matter what evidence I had. He'd spent 30 years believing everything his mother said and nothing was going to change that. Not even proof of her affair. I didn't fake anything, I said quietly. But you're going to believe whatever you want to believe, aren't you? He walked toward the door and stopped. I'm going to stay at my mom's tonight. I think you need some time alone to think about what you've done. He left, and I sat at the kitchen table looking at the screenshots on my phone and wondering how Lorena had managed to win, even when I had evidence of her worst secret. The next morning, I woke up to a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, I know what you found. Keep your mouth shut or I'll tell everyone you caused your own miscarriage. My whole body went cold. I stared at the message and read it 3 more times and felt my hands start to shake. She knew. Somehow she knew I'd found the messages, and instead of being scared, she was threatening me. I called Mac and he didn't answer. I called again and it went straight to voicemail. I drove to Lorena's house and found them sitting together on the porch drinking coffee like nothing was wrong. When I got out of the car, Lorena smiled and said, Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay? Mac said you've been having trouble sleeping lately. I held up my phone and showed her the text. You sent this. She tilted her head with practiced confusion. Sent what? I don't know what you're talking about. Mac took the phone and read the message and his face hardened. You probably sent this to yourself, he said, to make her look bad, just like you faked those screenshots. Lorena reached over and patted his arm and said, It's okay, honey. She's not well. We both know that. Maybe it's time we talked about getting her some real help before she does something she can't take back. I looked between them, mother and son, united against me, and I realized that private confrontation was never going to work. Lorena had spent 30 years training Mac to believe her over everyone else. She had contingencies and excuses and tears ready for every accusation I could throw at her. If I wanted to expose her, I was going to have to do it somewhere she couldn't spin the story. Somewhere everyone could see the evidence for themselves and make their own judgments. Somewhere she couldn't whisper to Mac about what really happened. The anniversary party was 6 days away. 200 witnesses, a projector screen, a microphone. If she wanted to celebrate 30 years of faithful marriage, I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly what those 30 years really looked like. Private confrontation failed, so I was going to destroy Lorena in front of everyone she'd ever wanted to impress. She thought she won because Mac chose her, but she forgot about the 200 guests coming to celebrate her perfect marriage. That party was going to have a projector and a microphone, and I was going to use both. She wanted to play the devoted wife in front of her friends, so I was going to let her right up until I wasn't. Come back for the anniversary party because it's about to get very ugly. The night of the party, I stood in front of my closet for 20 minutes trying to decide what to wear. Mac hadn't come home in 4 days. He was staying at his mother's house and only texting me to ask if I'd calmed down yet. I picked a red dress I'd bought years ago and never worn because Lorena once said red was too attention-seeking for someone with my complexion. I did my makeup slowly and carefully and thought about what I was about to do. The USB drive was already in my purse. I'd spent the last 5 days organizing everything. Texts organized by date, photos arranged chronologically, a timeline that showed exactly when each affair milestone had happened, and what lie Lorena had told Kenneth to cover it. I drove to the venue alone. It was a ballroom at the nicest hotel in town. Crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths and 200 guests in their Sunday best, waiting to celebrate 30 years of what they thought was a faithful marriage. Lorena spotted me the moment I walked in and rushed over with her arms outstretched. Elise, you came! She pulled me into a hug and whispered in my ear, Smile or everyone will think you're having another episode. I smiled and said, I wouldn't miss this for the world, Lorena. Tonight is going to be unforgettable. She pulled back and looked at me with something like suspicion in her eyes, but then someone called her name, and she floated away to accept more compliments on her dress and her decorations and her beautiful marriage. I found my seat at a table near the back and watched the room fill with people who had no idea what they were really celebrating. Kenneth stood near the bar looking uncomfortable in his suit. He'd never liked big parties. He'd once told me that Lorena planned these events for herself, and he just showed up where she told him to. Mac appeared at my table and sat down without looking at me. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said quietly. I said, I wasn't sure either, but I decided I didn't want to miss your mother's big night. He glanced at me with something like hope in his eyes. Does that mean you're ready to apologize? To move past all of this? I picked up my champagne glass and took a long sip and said, I think tonight is going to change a lot of things, Mac. Let's just see how it goes. The program started at 7. Lorena had planned every minute. First a slideshow of photos from their 30 years together, then toasts from family and friends, then a speech from Lorena about the secret to a lasting marriage, then dinner and dancing and probably more crying and praying and thanking God for blessing her with such a wonderful husband. I watched the slideshow and saw 30 years of smiling photos. Lorena and Kenneth on their wedding day. Lorena holding baby Mac. Family vacations and holidays and anniversaries. A whole life documented in images that told the story Lorena wanted everyone to believe. Then the toast began. Mac's aunt talked about how Lorena was the glue that held the family together. A church friend praised her dedication to her marriage and her faith. The pastor called her an example of Christian womanhood, that all the younger women should aspire to. And then Emmanuel stood up. I watched him walk to the microphone with a glass of champagne in his hand and a smile on his face. He was tall and handsome with gray at his temples and the kind of confidence that came from years of people trusting him. I've known Lorena and Kenneth for almost 15 years, he said, and I can honestly say I've never met a more devoted couple. Their marriage is an inspiration, the way they support each other, the way they put their family first, the way they've built a life based on faith and love and commitment. He raised his glass to 30 more years of the same. Everyone drank, and I watched Lorena dab at her eyes with a napkin, while Emmanuel took his seat beside his wife, the same wife who had no idea her husband had been sleeping with Lorena for 7 of those 15 years. Lorena stood up and walked to the microphone, and I knew this was the speech about the secret to a lasting marriage, the one where she would talk about trust and communication, and never going to bed angry. I reached into my purse and felt the USB drive and waited. 30 years, Lorena began. Her voice trembled with practiced emotion. 30 years ago, I married my best friend, and every single day since then, I've woken up grateful that I get to spend my life with him. She looked at Kenneth with tears in her eyes. We've had our challenges. Every marriage does. But we've never stopped choosing each other. We've never stopped putting our family first. And we've never broken the vows we made to each other in front of God and our families. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, and a few people turned to look at me. Lorena paused mid-sentence, and her smile flickered when she saw me walking toward the stage. Elise, she said into the microphone, what are you doing? I climbed the 3 steps to the platform and walked toward her and said, I wanted to add something to your speech, if that's okay. Lorena's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, suspicion, then a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, sweetheart. What did you want to say? She stepped back from the microphone, and I stepped forward and looked out at 200 faces staring up at me. I found Kenneth at the head table. I found Mac frozen in his seat. I found Emmanuel already starting to stand like he knew something was wrong. I pulled the USB drive out of my purse and held it up for everyone to see. The slideshow was loaded, and all I needed was the right moment to end Lorena's entire world. She had no idea I had the USB already queued up behind her anniversary photos. One signal to the tech booth, and every text and photo would be on that screen for 200 witnesses. I had complete control for the first time in this entire marriage. The moment is finally here. Lorena's hand closed around my wrist before I could move toward the projector. Her grip was tight, and her nails dug into my skin, and her smile never wavered. Elise, honey, let's go get some air, she said through her teeth. You look like you're not feeling well. I pulled my arm away and said, I feel fine, actually. Better than I've felt in weeks. She leaned close and whispered, if you do anything stupid right now, I will destroy you. I'll tell everyone you've been having a breakdown. I'll have you committed. I'll make sure Shane never speaks to you again. I whispered back, you already did all of that. What else do you have? Her smile finally cracked, just for a second. Then she composed herself and said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, of course you can say a few words. We're all family here. She stepped back and gestured toward the microphone, and I could see in her eyes that she was calculating, trying to figure out what I could possibly do that she couldn't spin, what evidence I could have that she couldn't explain away. But before I could move toward the tech booth, Lorena grabbed my elbow and steered me toward the hallway with that iron grip disguised as a loving gesture. We need to talk first, she hissed. Alone. She pushed me into a coat closet and closed the door behind us, and in the darkness I could finally see her real face. No smile, no warmth, just cold calculation. I know you found something, she said. Shane told me you went through my phone. Whatever you think you have, it won't work. I've spent 30 years building relationships in this community. I've spent 30 years being the woman everyone trusts. You've spent 2 weeks acting like a crazy person who can't handle losing a baby. I felt my whole body go rigid at those words. I didn't lose a baby, I said quietly. My baby died. There's a difference. Lorena waved her hand dismissively. Same thing. The point is no one is going to believe you over me. You could have video evidence and they'd still think you faked it because I've already told them how unstable you've been, how paranoid, how obsessed with destroying me. She stepped closer and I could smell her perfume mixed with champagne. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back out there and smile and clap during my speech and act like a supportive daughter-in-law. And then you're going to go home and pack your things and file for divorce and disappear from my son's life forever. If you do that quietly, I won't tell anyone what really happened with your miscarriage. My blood went cold. What do you mean what really happened? She smiled, and it was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. I mean that stress causes miscarriage. Everyone knows that. And you were so stressed, weren't you? Working all those hours, fighting with Shane about having children when he wasn't ready, pushing and pushing until your body gave out. She tilted her head. That's the story I'll tell if you make me. That you wanted a baby so badly you ignored the warning signs. That you kept working instead of resting. That you caused your own loss because you were too selfish to slow down. I stared at her in the darkness of that coat closet and realized I was looking at someone who had no limits. Someone who would say anything and destroy anyone to protect herself. Someone who had already decided I was disposable the moment I became inconvenient. You know what the worst part is? I said quietly. I actually thought you might love Shane. I thought everything you did was misguided maternal instinct. But you don't love anyone, do you? Not Kenneth, not Shane, not even Emmanuel. You just love being worshipped. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise maybe, or recognition. You have no idea what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. I found the jewelry, I said. The diamond bracelet, the pearls, the necklace, all those gifts from Emmanuel that you can't wear around your husband. You keep them hidden in your closet like trophies, like proof that someone wants you. Her face went pale in the dim light. That's what this has always been about, isn't it? Not love, not family, just making sure everyone sees you as perfect, as desirable, as the center of everything. Lorena's hand shot out and grabbed my throat. Not hard enough to choke me, but hard enough to make her point. "You don't know anything about my life," she hissed. "You don't know what it's like to give everything to a family that takes you for granted, to smile and perform and sacrifice for 30 years and still feel invisible." I pulled her hand away and said, "You're right. I don't know what that's like, because I would never do what you did to feel seen." I pushed past her and opened the closet door and walked back into the ballroom. She followed close behind me, still wearing that smile like armor. "Elise, wait," she called out sweetly. "You forgot your purse." I ignored her and walked straight to the tech booth. I handed the USB to the guy running the projector. "Add this to the slideshow," I said. "Play it when I give you the signal." He looked confused, but he plugged it in, and I walked back to the microphone. Lorena was standing near the stage watching me with narrowed eyes. She still didn't know what I had. She still thought she could spin whatever came next. She had no idea that everything she'd built was about to collapse. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I said. My voice was steady, even though my heart was pounding. "Lorena has been talking about this party for months. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of faithfulness, 30 years of putting her family first." I paused and looked at Lorena. She was watching me with that smile still frozen on her face. "But before we continue celebrating, I think everyone deserves to know the truth about what those 30 years really looked like." I nodded at the tech booth. The screen behind me flickered and changed from the wedding photo slideshow to something else entirely. The first image was a text message. "Last night was perfect. I can't stop thinking about you." The second was a photo of Lorena and Emmanuel in a hotel room with a timestamp from 5 years ago. The third was a text that said, "I wish I'd married you instead of Kenneth." The room went completely silent. I watched 200 faces process what they were seeing. I watched Emmanuel's wife stand up with her hand over her mouth. I watched Kenneth's face drain of all color as he read the messages scrolling across the screen. I watched Lorena's smile finally disappear completely. "These messages spanned 7 years," I said into the microphone. 7 years of lies. 7 years of cheating. 7 years of Lorena preaching about faithful marriage while sleeping with the church deacon. Lorena lunged for the projector controls, but 2 of Shane's cousins blocked her path. Emmanuel was already heading for the door, but 3 groomsmen from a wedding party in the next room had heard the commotion and were standing in his way. I kept talking. "She announced my miscarriage to 30 people after promising to keep it secret. She told everyone I was mentally unstable. She turned my own husband against me. And she did all of it while texting her boyfriend about how she wished she'd married him instead." Kenneth stood up slowly. He walked toward the screen and read the messages one by one. His face was completely blank. When he got to the one dated on their 25th anniversary that said, "I wish I was with you tonight instead of him," he reached up and pulled off his wedding ring. He looked at Lorena for a long moment. Then he threw the ring at her face and walked out the front door without saying a word. Half the room followed him. 200 people just watched Lorena's marriage end in real time, and she was still standing there trying to figure out how to spin it. She grabbed the microphone screaming that I was lying and crazy and jealous, but the photos kept scrolling behind her and every word she said made it worse. I had taken everything from her in front of everyone she'd ever wanted to impress. I thought that was the end of it, but she still had one more card to play. Lorena screamed into the microphone that I was a liar, and that the photos were fake, and that I had photoshopped everything because I was jealous and mentally ill and trying to destroy her family. But the photos kept scrolling behind her and no one was listening anymore. Emmanuel's wife picked up her champagne glass and threw it at Lorena's head, and it shattered against the wall behind her and glass went everywhere. Emmanuel tried to run for the exit, but 3 of Shane's cousins grabbed him and pinned him against the wall and started asking him how long he'd been sleeping with their aunt. The pastor, who had just praised Lorena as an example of Christian womanhood, was standing frozen with his mouth open, staring at explicit messages between Lorena and Emmanuel scrolling across the screen. 2 of Lorena's church friends were crying and hugging each other and saying they couldn't believe it, and they'd trusted her, and they'd invited her into their homes. The caterers had stopped serving and were standing in the corner watching the chaos unfold like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Emmanuel's wife pushed through the crowd toward her husband. 7 years? She screamed at him. 7 years you've been sleeping with her? We have children, Emmanuel. We have a life together. How could you do this? Emmanuel was still pinned against the wall by Shane's cousins. His face was red and sweating, and he kept saying, "It's not what it looks like. Those messages are old. We ended it years ago. Baby, please, you have to believe me. The timestamps are from last month," one of the cousins said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "There's one from Tuesday saying he can't wait to see her again." Emmanuel's wife made a sound like a wounded animal and turned away from him. Her daughters, who had been sitting at a table near the front, ran to her and wrapped their arms around her while she sobbed. Emmanuel tried to call out to them, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos. The pastor finally found his voice. "This is a house of God," he said weakly. "We should all calm down and handle this privately." "A house of God?" someone shouted from the back. "Your deacon has been sleeping with a married woman for 7 years, and you want us to calm down?" The pastor went quiet again. Lorena was still screaming into the microphone. "This is all lies. She made this up. She's been trying to destroy me since the day she met my son. Ask Shane. Ask him what she's really like." She pointed at Shane, who was still sitting at his table frozen. Tell them she's crazy. Tell them she's been having a breakdown." Shane stood up slowly, and every eye in the room turned to him. He looked at his mother. He looked at the screen where a photo of her and Emmanuel in bed together was currently displayed. He looked at me standing at the microphone with the USB drive still in my hand. "Is it true?" he asked his mother. His voice was quiet, but in the silent room, everyone could hear it. "Have you been cheating on Dad for 7 years?" Lorena's face crumpled into tears. "Shane, baby, you have to understand. Your father hasn't touched me in years. Emmanuel and I have a connection. It's not what it looks like. I still love your father. I just needed someone who appreciated me and—" "Is it true?" Shane repeated. "Yes or no?" Lorena sobbed. "Yes, but it's not my fault. You don't understand what my marriage has been like. Your father is cold and distant, and Emmanuel actually sees me, and Shane turned and walked out of the room without letting her finish. Lorena screamed his name and started running after him, but her heel caught on the edge of the stage and she stumbled. She grabbed for the anniversary cake display to steady herself, but it wasn't stable enough to hold her weight. The whole thing tipped forward and she went down face first into 3 tiers of white frosting and fondant. For a moment, no one moved. Lorena lay there in the wreckage of her own anniversary cake, sobbing and covered in frosting, while 200 guests watched in stunned silence. Then someone in the back started laughing. It spread through the room like wildfire until half the guests were laughing and the other half were filming on their phones. Lorena pushed herself up onto her knees. Frosting was dripping from her hair and her designer dress was ruined, and mascara was running down her cheeks in black rivers. She looked around the room at all the people who had spent years telling her how perfect she was and found nothing but disgust and pity and barely contained laughter. "Stop filming," she screamed. "Stop it right now. This is a private family matter. You have no right. You lost the right to privacy when you made my miscarriage public," I said into the microphone. "Now everyone gets to see who you really are." I stepped down from the stage and walked toward the exit. Emmanuel's wife grabbed my arm as I passed and said, "Thank you. I've suspected for years, but I never had proof." I nodded and kept walking. Lorena was screaming my name now. "Elise! Elise, get back here! You can't just leave! You ruined everything! You destroyed my family! Elise!" I was almost at the door when Shane stepped in front of me. His face was pale and his eyes were red, and he looked like someone had just told him everything he believed was a lie. "How could you do this?" he asked. "How could you humiliate her like that in front of everyone?" I stared at him and felt something cold settle in my chest. She announced my miscarriage to 30 people after promising to keep it secret. She told everyone I was crazy. She threatened to tell people I caused my own miscarriage. And you chose her. Every single time you chose her. He shook his head. "She's my mother. And I'm your wife. I was your wife. And you never once chose me." I reached into my purse and pulled out the burner phone I'd taken from Lorena's closet the day I found the messages. I pressed it into his hands. "This has everything. Every message. Every photo. Every lie she told your father for 7 years. I was going to show you privately. I was going to give you the chance to handle it as a family. But you told me I faked the screenshots. You told me I was crazy. You moved out and stayed with her and let her threaten me." I stepped around him toward the door. So I handled it the only way she left me. Lorena was still screaming my name behind me. I could hear her sobbing and choking on frosting and begging someone to help her up. I didn't look back. I walked out of that ballroom and into the cool night air and kept walking until I reached my car. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat. I sat there for a long time staring at nothing. I had just destroyed my mother-in-law's marriage and reputation in front of 200 people. I had just ended my own marriage in the most public way possible. I had just burned down every bridge I had to the family I'd married into 5 years ago. And I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel bad. I felt free. For the first time since that dinner when Lorena announced my miscarriage to 30 people, I felt like I could finally breathe. My phone buzzed. A text from Danielle. "I just saw on Facebook that something happened at the anniversary party. Are you okay? What did you do?" I typed back, "I'll tell you everything. Can I stay at your place tonight?" She responded immediately. "Already making up the guest room. Get here safe." I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward Danielle's apartment without looking back at the hotel, where my mother-in-law was still covered in cake and crying about how I'd ruined her life. She had ruined mine first. I'd just returned the favor.